Metal Storm, Humanity's Ruthless Assault on the Stars. By Elton Gar. War wasn't uncommon, but fighting humans was different. Minnid had been told that they were reckless to the point of insanity. But that didn't even come close to explaining what he saw. It was like they wanted to kill themselves more than they wanted to kill their enemy. They seemed to have even less care for their lives than the Chiliran drones, which had no personal autonomy at all. The 3 human ships had attacked with no warning. Nearest them was their battleship. It was the only sign of defense that they showed, but it didn't defend the people, only the 2 ships behind it. The second ship was their carrier. A few seconds after it had arrived, thousands of doors had opened, and the fighters had flooded out. They were packed together so tightly that some of them crashed into each other as they came out, and the next wave of ships had to crash through the debris to enter the combat. But once they were out, they broke into groups of 5 ships moving in perfect formations. Human technology had advanced quickly, but it was still decades behind Minnid's people. Because of that, every shot of the defensive lasers destroyed at least one of the fighters. And if they fought in a reasonable way, that would matter. But the humans treated the fighters more like they were missiles. Sometimes they would turn before they hit his ship. Other times they would smash into it or even attach to it and then explode. The hulls wouldn't do a lot on their own. They didn't need to, because the next part of the attack was even more insane. The humans began to launch people in metal armor at his ship like they were bullets, as many missing the ship as hitting it. It was hard to imagine how they survived. They had some small booster rockets, but that didn't explain why the humans didn't just die at the speed they were hitting the hull. And the sensors suggested that at least some of the armored men did smash into the hull hard enough to destroy themselves. Those that successfully landed on the hull without dying would use the damaged hulls to grab on and cut through the weakened sections of the hull. Minnid's ship was designed for combat, and by themselves, the small hull breaches wouldn't stop the ship's operation. But of course, the humans continued to attack once inside the ship. With each human that made it inside, it became more difficult for the crew to fight the space battle. They had to send security to deal with the attacks, so they couldn't help with other things, and the weapons were becoming damaged and the crew exhausted. But his crew kept fighting. The human assault was fast and vicious, but couldn't last forever. That many people took up too much space, and you'd need the supplies to feed and house them, and the life support would take up even more space. But both the fighters and the armored soldiers continued to flood out, and they began to gain ground in Minnid's ship. He gave orders for the security to fight the humans, but even knowing their ship and being able to take defensive positions, it was costly, and unlike the humans, Minnid's crew cared about living through the battle. Over the next 20 minutes, the outcome became more clearly inevitable. The humans would overwhelm them like they had dozens of ships, before they would then dismantle the ships and recycle them, making the human pirates even stronger. Minnid's crew fought valiantly. At first, the fighting was mostly limited to the security teams, but soon the engineers and the gunmen were forced to pick up arms and fight the armored humans as they fought through the ship. While they were fighting, Minnid opened the communications and sent out a distress call to anyone who might come. But he knew it was all but impossible anyone would come at all, and if they did, it was likely that they'd lose just as fast as Minnid's ship. With that sent, Minnid focused on the chaos that had unfolded within the confines of his ship. The metallic echoes of struggle reverberated through the narrow corridors as the armored humans pressed forward relentlessly. Their methodical advance was marked by precision and a disturbing lack of concern for their own lives that would have been far less effective if the humans weren't so difficult to kill. Minnid clenched his mandibles in frustration. The security teams were stretched thin, and the engineers were now thrust into the front lines, wielding improvised weapons to stave off the invaders. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal, and the distant hum of energy weapons and the humans' more primitive guns. The humans, undeterred by the defensive efforts, adapted with alarming speed. Their armored figures moved with a disturbing synergy, systematically breaching compartments and forcing Minnid's crew into a desperate retreat as they used the armor and bodies of the humans in front of them as a shield for the less injured. The situation was dire. The human invaders had managed to disable critical systems, leaving sections of the ship in a state of near-total darkness. The flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the faces of Minnid's crew as they fought against the encroaching enemy. As the life support failed, Minnid gritted his teeth. The humans were willing to sacrifice even the very air they breathed to achieve their objectives. The realization sent a chill down Minnid's exoskeleton. As the minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity, the armored humans gained ground, inch by inch. The once imposing battleship had become a chaotic battleground, where every corridor echoed with the clatter of metal on metal and the anguished cries of Minnid's crew. In a desperate bid to regain control, Minnid issued orders to seal off certain sections of the ship, sacrificing them to buy precious time. The armored invaders continued to breach bulkheads and circumventing obstacles with relentless efficiency. As he lost communication with engineering, Minnid's eyes flickered with a mix of frustration and resignation. The once mighty battleship, a symbol of strength, was now on the verge of succumbing to the relentless onslaught of the human pirates. As the battle raged on, Minnid couldn't shake the unsettling thought that these humans were an unstoppable force. And as he saw the humans on the sensors outside of the bridge, then heard the metal of welding torches and the human armor pounding against the door, he gave up any hope. More advanced weapons could have made it through the door faster, but the pounding of the metal was terrifying, and Minnid's hand shook as he held the powerful laser gun. He knew he couldn't win this fight, but there would be more fights, and every human he killed would be one less to attack the next ship. The onslaught, no matter how vicious, had to burn out eventually. He shot the first human through the bent metal of the door. It was 7 feet tall and entirely covered in metal, so you couldn't even see the eyes. The thick metal of the hands was dented where it had punched the wall. There were sparks as the laser cut through the armor, but the humans hardly slowed pulling at the metal of the door as others heated it with their cutting tools. The second shot cut away his arm that fell to the ground. The human who had been pulling stepped back and sagged, and a new human began to pull at the metal in the exact same way. Minnid shot 4 more humans this way, but they didn't try a new tactic or give medical aid to men who had their arms destroyed. They simply kept coming, and as each of them stepped forward, the door opened further. Then as the door was finally pulled away, he shot one of them in the chest. There were more sparks, and the armored man lurched forward then fell. A second later, one of the armored men behind him seemed to straighten and said,
"Order surrender, and we will allow you and your men to return home. We only want your technology and your raw materials."
Minnid didn't know if that was true, but he knew that thousands of people on both sides had died today, and so he shot again. The blow struck him in the head and sheared away a large part of the helmet, but he just stood there. Even the humans wouldn't be stupid enough to create a military AI that powerful, Minnid thought, as he realized there was no one in the armor. But before he could say anything, one of the other pieces of armor said,
"There is no value in that. It will just be recycled along with all the rest."
Minnid looked at the armor and said,
"I will not live a slave to a robot."
Greg took off the helmet that connected him to the robot drones and surveyed the main deck of the command ship. There were thousands of other people in similar pods. Some of them ran squadrons of the fighter drones, and others like him teleprojected into squads of robots. He tapped the communications button and said,
"Their commander is dead."
An automated voice replied,
"Kill recorded. A bonus has been added to your pay."
Greg felt ill at the amount of killing he had done today. He always felt bad after a major battle, though he didn't get physically sick after killing people anymore. In some ways, that made him feel worse. But someone had to support his family, and the pay for this job had gotten them out of the worst of the slums, and his brother could afford his medicine. He just hoped that the technology they learned from the aliens they attacked would allow humans to advance to a point where attacks like this weren't necessary. He then put the helmet back on, and his armored drone took the helm of the alien ship, sending the message to the battleship that the bridge had been secured. He then switched his squad from assault to scavenge mode, and began to gather anything that looked technologically or culturally important, placing it into the small containers in the robot's chests where it would be protected until the scavenging ships arrived. Once the robot had started, Greg connected to one of the robot drones that was nearer the combat and took it over, moving relentlessly back into combat.
Author's note. One thing that fiction and science fiction, in particular, often do is underestimate just how devastating modern weapons are. The example that makes that most clear to me is the classic idea of a soldier on the ground being shot by a helicopter with a minigun and dodging out of the way of the shots. A minigun shoots as many as 6,000 bullets a minute. That's pretty impressive, and you're not going to jump out of the way. But it's child's play compared to the metal storm gun. It's designed to take out vehicles, and the claim is it can shoot 16,000 bullets. Except that's every second. In a minute, it can shoot about 1 million. Go ahead and try blocking that with a lightsaber. So instead they get weapons that shoot slower than the average handgun, and seem to do about the same amount of damage if they hit. And then we get to drones. To me, drones aren't scary because someone might put AI in them. They're scary because you don't need to. You can get 100 people who are willing to kill people and send them on whatever mission you want. And no matter what your losses are, you can send out the same 100 well-trained killers on the next mission because the soldier is safely in a bunker 3,000 miles away. Meanwhile, the spaceships in our science fiction shows seem to be less complicated to run than a modern battleship, and handheld weapons can be dodged by leaning to the left. The only show I can even think of that hinted at this was Stargate SG-1, with the humans using guns that were much more effective, until they got more traditional and far less effective sci-fi weapons and began to use them. The technology in this story is more advanced than current technology in some ways, but it's probably still not as deadly as the real thing. The main difference is how willing they are to lose their drones, but automation is getting better, and the war in Ukraine has proven just how effective relatively cheap drones can be in combat. So let's hope we find a way to peace before we have every soldier controlling a squadron of disposable drones, blowing up sections of the world they've never even really seen. If you've enjoyed this, you can sign up for my weekly newsletter at www.anscifi.com/free-book-links, or you can help even more and get a free exclusive story every week by signing up for my Patreon at www.patreon.com/Elton. Thank you. Elton Gar.